All right. Got it. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining, especially our speakers for tonight. Um, I think we'll have a very informative meeting. I don't think it'll be one that we'll think of as fun, but it will be very informative, and maybe we'll learn a lot about it and maybe find out things that we can do to help make this a better world. Um, I think that we should have from the names that were given, we should have maybe 25 or so people on here. So I'm hoping that will be the case. But anyway, thank all of you for joining, and thank you to the speakers for coming and visiting with us.
Thank you, Bob. Okay, Wally, take it away.
Well, there's really nothing to report. The balance is the same as it was, which is $1,277 in our account. We've had no new members join and no expenses in last month.
Now, if anybody pays the dues for the year now, they are members for the rest of this year and then all of 2024, correct? Yeah.
Telephone.
Okay.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah, Julie.
One of the youth members wanted to make a donation, and I think I sent him the correct, Jose, I believe his name is, and I think I sent him the correct information, but it was like maybe a year ago. He wanted to join the local group here, so I wanted to make a donation to your group. But I was wondering if that information was current, like where to send the check or what have you.
Yeah, the only way we accept donations or membership dues is through a check. We don't have a donation link on our website. So if we mail the check, we should have received it. But as far as I know, Wally, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember receiving a check from Jose.
Okay.
No, I don't believe we did.
Yeah.
I can't put all that information in the chat. I'm about to do that. Just give me a second.
Okay, all right. So today at this October 2nd meeting, we have two wonderful speakers to talk about the women's movement in Iran and where things are after what has been happening in the last 1 year or so. So the two speakers, the first one, Armin Salek. He was born in Iran and moved to the United States at the age of 5. He is a first-generation attorney and an executive director of the Youth Justice Alliance. He is a full-time law teacher and mentor for aspiring attorneys from underrepresented communities. Armin received the Rather Prize for Education Innovation in 2019. He was named the Austin ISD High School Teacher of the Year in 2020 and Texas Outstanding Young Lawyer of the Year in 2021. Armin established the Youth Justice Alliance, which provides fellowships for aspiring first-generation lawyers that offer financial and institutional support from high school all the way to law school. And at the Progressives for Iranian Democracy, he serves in multiple roles, including on the policy committee. The other wonderful speaker that we have tonight is Niloufar Hafizi. Niloufar is a native Estonian who works for a Muslim American voting rights advocacy organization. She holds an economics degree from the University of Chicago and a JD from South Texas College of Law, Houston. She was inducted into the Order of Barristers for her advocacy accomplishments. Her most treasured law-related experiences were serving as a teaching assistant for newer law students, for which she received the Langdell Teaching Award, and instructing high school students about constitutional rights as a Marshall Brennan Constitutional Literary Project Fellow. She's passionate about voting and civil rights, fair redistricting, and climate change mitigation. She served on the policy and outreach committees at the Progressives for Iranian Democracy and is the current secretary. Please join me in welcoming Armin and Niloufar to our meeting tonight. The title of their talk is Woman, Life, Freedom, Reflections on the Woman-Led Movement for Human Rights in Iran. Take it away, Armin and Niloufar. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I learned a lot about Niloufar in that as well. I didn't know she went to U Chicago, got an economics degree. I didn't know about some of her work with high schools. That was great.
We don't really introduce each other at PFID. We just get straight to work. So that was our first chance. No, thank you all so much for the opportunity to be here and talk about this topic that's always on our minds and very close to our hearts. I thought you were going to have Parveen Khanum, do a ceremony to introduce us and anoint this with her queenly blessing. But I guess that introduction also works for them.
She'll be here to fact check us.
Yeah, very true. I'm a little nervous now. I hope I don't get anything wrong. No, we've fact checked our presentations. So you already know what we look like. But yeah, who are we? Progressives for Iranian Democracy. We're one of the many groups that have formed in the wake of the tragedy and movement for rights that we're about to talk about. We're a mix of Iranian Americans who were born in Iran and those who are from here and some other countries. Our primary task is to educate policymakers and the general public on why a human rights-centered foreign policy is beneficial for both the Iranian people and for U.S. security and global security. And our overall goal is a pluralistic, secular, democratic Iran that respects equal rights for all Iranians, no matter their race, religion, gender, sexual orientation. And a lot of our work, as I said, is around educating lawmakers and those with decision-making abilities, as well as community groups such as this one. Armin, did I miss anything?
No, and you can add that this is a Texas-based group. It actually came about from folks in Texas who came together for the first Texas Iranian American Advocacy Day, which was a pretty special moment where we brought together Iranian Americans from Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, Austin, Corpus, and some other neighboring areas as well. So it was a really powerful moment for us. It was the first time I've ever seen Iranians do that. And when I worked in the legislature as a lowly intern, nobody with a special role, but I had never seen Iranians walking the halls of the legislature like that. So it's just been a really special opportunity for growth and for us to come together.
Yeah, perfectly said. I didn't know there were Iranians in Corpus Christi, but there you go. So before we dive into our main subject matter, we want to start with a background, just so that we all have the same baseline information and of why the country got to this point. So Iran is one of the few theocracies in the world. Its official name is the Islamic Republic of Iran, but please don't let the name fool you. It's not a democratic republic in the sense that, say we are here. Its official head of government is the supreme leader. It also elects a president, a parliament, and a group called sub-council called the Assembly of Experts. But the way those entities and candidates are elected and vetted is they have to go through a non-democratic portion of the government called the Guardian Council first. That entity is completely appointed by the supreme leader, who is currently Ali Khamenei. He is just the second supreme leader since the republic was founded in 1979, 1980. The other half of the Guardian Council is appointed by the judiciary, so there's no direct democracy there, and they have to vet all the candidates who run for democratic elections, which is one reason why generally voter turnout in Iran is low. Another thing this non-democratic council does is it has the power to overturn laws enacted by the parliament. It's another undemocratic check on things in the system over there. And it's also worth pointing out that sometimes the list of options people have when they go to vote range from just, pretty bad to very bad. And the current president actually is currently part of an Amnesty International campaign to hold him accountable for crimes against humanity he allegedly committed in the late 1980s. In 1988, when he was head of the judiciary and approved the extrajudicial killing of at least 2,500, but estimates range from 2,500 to 30,000 people. He had them summarily executed without proper process.
I always try to use analogies, and I think the list of candidates would be something like you have the choice between Alex Jones and Rush Limbaugh for president this year. That's the closest thing I could think of to the list of options.
It's a great analogy. Here's just a visualization from the Council on Foreign Relations of the way the government is set up. And I'll pass it to Armin to talk about a very important part of the government that's not elected. If I can figure out how to.
That jumped a little bit. So as you saw from that map, everything is intentionally convoluted. It's intentionally confusing and convoluted with multiple branches, and it's hard to follow to serve as insulation against the very type of revolution that we are advocating for today. So back when the Islamic regime took power during the Islamic Revolution, the military played a big role by not playing any role. They actually declared the neutrality and basically made way for the Islamic Revolution to happen. So when the regime comes into power, they don't want to be that susceptible to revolution. They don't want to be that susceptible to being attacked and overthrown. So what they do is that they kept the original military, which is called the Atesh, which just translates into military in Farsi. And that's currently still a force of 600,000 folks. But they added this other force, which is much closer to the regime. And that is called the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And they're about 125,000 strong. Now, this group, they're guarders of the revolution. Their job is to be close. These are the folks that are even the strongest, most ardent supporters of the regime. The regime trusts them not to support a military coup. And if that 125,000 isn't enough, there's another group, a paramilitary group called the Basij, which is about 300, 400,000 deep. And these are other folks that can be armed and activated in defense of the regime. So this is all intentionally done. And I know we have different branches in the US military, but this is different. These are two completely separate forces in terms of their mission, in terms of their ideology, and they're typically seen as at odds with one another. The IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, is the home base of the regime. They keep them better equipped. They give them more funding. They give them more influence, more power. And they are the ones that are typically in charge of not only protecting the revolution, but they also take on external campaigns and support for other groups, like you might have heard of Hamas or Hezbollah. The IRGC would be the group that's in charge of helping facilitate the growth and development of some of those forces that are doing incredible damage in other places as well. So you may have heard of the Quds forces, which was led by a general named Soleimani, who was killed recently. So that falls under the IRGC as well. But the most important thing to know is that these two groups are intentionally kept separate so that no one large military force on its own could stage a coup. They are a check on one another to protect the regime, and the IRGC is most closely tied to the actual regime. And then who killed Massa? It was actually the morality police. These are individuals who are charged with basically regulating lifestyle, including how women dress, act, dance, sing, and everything in between, and how they show their hair. I think Niloufar, that's it.
Just made a rookie mistake. So how did Iran get to the point where it became a theocracy with this special revolutionary force Iran was a monarchy before it became a theocracy. The most recent monarch was Muhammad Reza Shah, whose reign began after his father abdicated in 1941. His tenure was controversial for many reasons, but the reasons that are important for us is part of the effect of his reign was he constantly was ruffling the feathers among the religious clerical class. He, like his father before him, wanted Iran to be a more, it's like modernized country that had a lot of similarities with the West, kind of like the model that the ruler of Turkey at the time was pushing. He gave women various rights they didn't have before, including the right to vote, the right to initiate a divorce and retain a child custody. And he also had a tendency for grandiosity. He was not really ashamed of being an autocrat. And in 1967, he declared himself the King of Kings. And as his reign went forward, he became known for decadent displays and for using Iran's money for the kinds of things that generally make the working class upset. And throughout his reign, he actually suffered an assassination attempt early on in his reign, so he never had the full support of the country, as pretty much, I guess, any ruler doesn't have. But he disliked communists and was disliked by them in turn. When he would go around internationally on trips, especially in America, leftist student groups of Iranians who were studying abroad would often protest his visit. Those protests, for various reasons, intensified and came to a head in 1978. A combination of these leftist groups and religious Iranians wanted him gone. And on September 8th, 1978, his military police fired on a religious demonstration that was taking place in Tehran. And reports at the time said hundreds or thousands had been killed. That's been questioned since then, but they did kill a certain number of people. And after that, which is called Black Friday, the country went into a general strike to cripple the economy, including in the oil industry. And once the Shah saw that the country really didn't want him there and there was no way forward without a massive use of force, he went into exile and left Iran. And Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, who himself had previously been in exile, returned to Iran and assumed control. He initially pretended to want to work with other groups, but the movement he was a part of, the Islamic Revolution, which wanted Iran to be an Islamic republic, took control. And one of the first things he did was announced that within workplaces, women had to wear a mandatory hijab. And that led to a series of protests which were quelled. Restrictions and the Islamicization of Iran continued over the next couple of years after 1979, which is generally thought of as the point where the Islamic Revolution happened. And by the time you get to 1983, the ruling Islamic Republic declared that veils were mandatory all the time. And this was hurtful. This is a side note. This was hurtful not just to people who are not religious, who didn't want to wear it, but it's also disliked by women who are religious and do wear it out of like genuine faith, because when everyone is forced to wear it, the act of wearing it becomes meaningless and loses its power as a symbol.
Can I add a couple of notes to that?
Sure, yes.
From some of the historical context, one of the analogies that I always love to use when I'm speaking to my students about Iran before the revolution in terms of the grandiosity is imagine the palace at Versailles and a king living like that while allowing some social advances, really strictly enforcing his own power and living in this incredible state of life where you have celebrities from all over the world coming to Iran, living lavishly in his palaces. And there was a huge class uprising, not just a religious uprising. And when that revolution occurred in 1979, it was actually a collective action by a lot of groups, religious groups, communist groups, groups that didn't support westernizing the country. It was truly a broad tent revolution, but one group really took all of that power. So a lot of the folks that actually supported the revolution ended up becoming enemies of the regime quickly after, especially when they saw the differences, saw the impact of the 1983 decisions. But there really was no time to push back because Iran was in the midst of a war that was killing young people. It was killing a generation of young people, especially young men who were out there fighting wars, young people who were told to run out there on the minefields to clear dangers for the soldiers who would come in behind them. So that almost served as an insulation for the regime as well, that this new disaster, this new war initiated by Saddam Hussein had now occupied the regime's energy and lives. Sorry, Niloufar.
No, that's a really great additional context. One thing this is also a little bit of a sidetrack, but one thing that the consolidation of power the Islamic Republic managed, they allowed some extent of freedom, and they kept universities open initially. And that way, a lot of the members of the other groups who had helped make the revolution happen thought they had the freedom, they identified themselves, they were openly partaking in political activity. And then they did a crackdown once they knew who was who, and did mass arrests and later mass executions. So Iran, as per the law, it requires women to wear a hijab, and not wearing it includes a risk of criminal penalties. But throughout the Islamic Republic's history, there's been varying levels of enforcement and how much hair you can get away with showing. It's somewhat fluid, especially later on as the country's moved forward from the initial years of the Islamic Republic. In 2006, female human rights activists pushed a campaign to bring about gender equality in Iran. They went around trying to collect 1 billion signatures for this. One of their leaders was actually arrested and put in prison. Then in 2008, there was another set of protests, not as widespread as the ones that just happened, but what had happened was there was an election for president, and the candidate who claimed he won, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who became president, was considered, kind of the hardliner, more religious. The reformist cleric Mir Hussein Mousavi lost, and it was widely believed that the vote had been rigged against him. So there were widespread protests that led to some high-profile deaths. They made the news, but ultimately were brutally put down by the regime. And this wave of protests we're seeing now, it also kind of exploded with the backdrop of economic frustration and frustration about the lack of opportunity, especially for young people, going on in Iran. On September 13, a young woman named Gina Mahsa Amini. She has two names because her name Mahsa Amini is a Persian name that's allowed by the government. Her name Gina, which is a Kurdish, is not allowed in Iran as per the Islamic Republic. So imagine having your name be basically illegal. But that's why she's often referred to by two names. She was just visiting Tehran with her family. She was not like an activist. She was not part of some anti-government movement. But enforcement of hijab is a little bit different in Tehran than in where the city she was coming from. She was stopped for wearing the hijab improperly, of having too much hair showing. And there are conflicting accounts of what happened later, but the truth seems to be this. She was beaten when she was in custody. This was confirmed by other people who had also been taken into custody by the morality police that day. She was taken to the hospital, and there were a lot of heartbreaking images of her in hospital bed that came out after her death. She died of wounds to the head. And the regime tried to say she died of a heart attack from a pre-existing condition. They did not allow her family to see her before she died. And once she did, her death ignited widespread protests, starting especially at her funeral in her native Kurdistan. And these protests spread across Iran. with the slogan "Woman, Life, Freedom" to summarize what the protesters wanted. And the original slogan is actually "Jin Jian Azadi," "Woman, Life, Freedom" in Kurdish, because that is where the protest started. You may have also heard the slogan "Zan Zindagi Azadi." It's the same meaning, just in Persian, which more Iranians speak than they do Kurdish. And throughout September 2022 up until January 2023, about over 500 protesters were killed, including 60 children. And approximately, it's been estimated 18 to 20,000 people were taken into custody as political prisoners. And some of the more, all the stories are heartbreaking, but some of the worst ones made the international news, including a 16-year-old girl named Nicole Shagharami, who joined a protest and was found to have like signs of rape on her body after she was basically pushed into a car by the morality police and killed, and she was initially not even allowed to be returned to her family. They wouldn't give her family the corpse because they didn't want anyone to know what had happened, and they accused her of having committed either suicide or having somehow fallen off a building instead of having died in custody. During all these protests roiling the country, there was an instance where a group of schoolgirls in a school actually chased out a government representative who was visiting the school. And after that incident, beginning in last November, there were a series of incidents where girls would fall ill in schools across Iran. These are just like kids, they're schoolgirls. About between 1,200 to 5,000 are estimated to have fallen sick, and the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights said there's adequate evidence to say it was the government's fault for poisoning these schoolgirls. But as this is happening, women continue to defy the hijab laws. And I don't know if this will work, but I do want to show a short video of what's going on with the protest.
If you're trying to share sound, we can't hear it. You might want to share computer sound on the share options.
Sorry, I didn't hear you. Did the sound go through?
No, the sound didn't go through. You'd have to, when you press share, you'd have to share sound as well. But we do have 9 minutes left in our time, just in case we need to.
Oh, really? Okay, sorry about that. So, in summary, these protests, were an inspiration for women. Some of them were joyful, as you've seen, of people getting rid of their hijab. This past summer, the morality police, which had kind of loosened its enforcement, cracked down again. And I'll pass it back to Armin.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, a lot of this is incredibly heartbreaking because of how far back we are going in time. Iran had made some very serious movements and progress in terms of women's literacy, women's education. Women outnumbered men in colleges. I think 58% of college classes were comprised of women, because there is such a strong movement to basically say, regime, if you try to hold us back, look at what we can accomplish. I really do think that's a big inspiration behind a lot of women succeeding so incredibly in education, not just within Iran, but beyond Iran's borders. It's almost a counter-revolution to limitation. If you limit me, you're giving me a reason to push back, to advance myself, to advance my gender, and to advance our culture. So it is a really powerful women-led revolution, and we claim that it's the first women's-led revolution sometimes. I don't know if that's true. I think there have been other women-led revolutions. We're very proud of this women-led revolution. Maybe it's the first one, but even if it's not, we're very proud that it is uniquely women-led. Not just the name of Gina Amini, but the women who are on the streets protesting, the girls that keep going to class, keep going to school, the women across the world who are serving as spokespeople for this movement. So it's really powerful. We mentioned a couple of the other movements against the regime. This is the largest protest against the regime in their historically, at least, short lifespan, right? Since 79, this is the most collective, most inclusive movement against the regime. Historically, we had seen certain communities fight back against the regime. That was the more college educated, maybe urban elites and urban centers, and maybe more affluent communities. This movement has truly brought together urban and rural. It has brought together people who are working class, blue collar, and those with advanced degrees. It has brought people together across ethnic divides, religious divides, regional divides, from South Iran to North Iran to West Iran to East Iran. And each of these areas have really unique cultural perspectives in a way that we may not see in the US. In the US, we are a lot more heterogeneous from north, west, south, or east, no matter how much we might poke fun at each other. In Iran, there is huge cultural divides, language divides, food divides, music divides, ethnic divides, and all of those groups for the first time have really come together in this moment. We can go to the next one. I can take that. I think this is you, but I can take it if you want.
Okay, sure. I talk too much. So.
No. We'll keep this one short because I think the story so far has kind of told a story. This is a movement for gender equality. This is a movement for secular governance. This is a movement for economic opportunity, the end of ethnic discrimination, religious tolerance, end to religious discrimination. And what that's going to amount to when it comes to this regime is governmental change. They have shown that they're not capable of providing any of these things. In fact, they fight against each of these pieces. And one thing that it is certainly is not is a fight against Islam or any religion. This is a movement so that everybody can have a choice in their own life, the freedom to celebrate religion in their own homes, in their own ways as they choose, without forcing that on others. This is truly a movement to provide a space and create a country that allows for basic human dignities and freedoms for its people, and is no longer an international pariah. Instead, it is a center of cultural development, a center for progress, an ally and a stabilizing force in the Middle East, as opposed to a destabilizing force across the Middle East, across the globe, a supporter of Putin and Russia, an aid to violent organizations that are destabilizing neighboring nations. We want that to change. And the reality is that a lot of Iranians in the past were for reform, but more and more we are seeing that people are seeing that reform isn't succeeding. Even with little progress that is sometimes offered in the form of the slightly less extreme candidate for president, we quickly see a shift back. And you never know what the next day is going to look like. You never know if your hijab is covering enough of your hair. You never know if the way you're dancing or singing or walking is going to be illegal and you're going to be subject to violence, if your family member is going to be killed. And this regime has shown that it cannot protect its people, and it's an incredible oppressor of its people.
And moreover, it doesn't want to protect its people. It doesn't see its role as that way. And it's more interested in taking the money it has and investing it in terrorist operations and supporting dictators like Bashar al-Assad in Syria, as Armin said. One thing that is important to note and why we wanted to point this out is because a lot of the images and videos of the revolutionary movement are centered on women getting rid of the hijab or burning their hijab. There have been some narratives that have cropped up about how, oh, this is just about hijab, it's not about anything else, or oh, this is about, an anti-Muslim movement in some way. And that's just not true. This movement is much broader than that.
In fact, the Gina herself was a Muslim woman. She was a Sunni Muslim. She was a Kurdish woman. And that was part of what made this so powerful, that the Kurdish people started this movement. A Kurdish woman inspired this movement, and then it became a movement across the globe. She was just a 22-year-old college student coming to Tehran and just a normal family trip. And I'm grabbed this. I think it's my partner's graduation. But sometimes in Iran, you will see women wearing their headscarves like this, and nothing will happen. And Gina was, covering her hair even more than that. But you never know when there's no accountability by this government. You never know what that day is going to hold. You never know what law and oppression is going to face you. And on that day, she was beaten to death. And she didn't choose to be the symbol of the movement, but that's why it's so powerful. She just decided to take a trip to Tehran with her family, and she was killed because of it.
So what are some of the things that we've been working on to try to improve the situation and make democracy possible in Iran? Well, one very important piece of legislation we've been doing education around is called the Mahsa Act. It's called the Mahsa Amini, I should know this, something, Security Accountability Act. It was just passed in the House recently. And what it does is it requires the US government to annually determine whether there will be sanctions on individuals within the Islamic Republic leadership, including the supreme leader itself, the economic entities that are controlled by him, his cabinet, the president, appointees of the supreme leader. And importantly, that includes the revolutionary courts, which are the bodies that impose horrific sentences, including execution sentences on political prisoners. Another part of the Mahsa Act, which doesn't have like teeth, but is important just as a matter of, verifying facts and supporting, holding people accountable. It recognizes the role of the current president, Raisi, in being responsible for all the extrajudicial killings we talked about earlier when he was head of the judiciary.
He's still known as the butcher for his acts on that day. Not that day, but in those killings.
Throughout that period. Now I'll pass it back to Armin to tell the story of how a lot of community groups came together to get this done.
Absolutely. So this was such a powerful movement. I talked about how this has galvanized the Iranian American community, but this was not an act that was supposed to move through the House of Representatives. But Iranian Americans across the country galvanized, advocated for this. We're not a historically involved community. We need to vote more. We need to be more involved in local, state, and national politics. But this really inspired us to get involved. And we were calling and emailing, and we showed up to the nation's capital. And we worked with some unlikely allies, including some of the folks that helped draft this bill. And we got this passed with near unanimous votes in the U.S. House of Representatives. If you take a look at those numbers, the total votes for on both sides, 209 Republicans and 201 Democrats. And keep in mind that the people that originally proposed this are some folks that I typically would not align myself with in any way. And that scared off a lot of Democrats originally at first. But we advocated and we said that we wanted this as a migrant community, as a community that typically does vote Democrat. And not only that, I'll give away my personal political leanings, but I'm a Democrat. I saw that a lot of Iranians were moving Republican because they were like, they're the only ones that care about us. And then it was our job as progressives for Iranian democracy to go out there, talk to our legislators and say, hey, we want this too. We're progressives, we're liberals, we're Democrats. We vote for you. We help campaign for you. We want this as well. This isn't a Republican issue. This is a bipartisan issue. None of us want to see this destabilizing criminal regime in the Middle East. We don't want this. We don't want them to send their kids over here to escape the miserable government and economy that they themselves created. We want to prevent that from happening. If they're going to ruin the country, then their kids can stay there instead of coming here and taking work visas and student visas from the people who are just trying to get access to economic and human rights by traveling abroad. But it was an incredible story of us coming together across state lines. I've met Niloufar for the first time through this movement, and I've met Iranians from across the country, north, east, south, and west because of this. And it was because of all those efforts that this happened. And it was also because of Americans, non-Iranians, who joined this movement and helped us advocate and say that this is important, not just for one community, but for all of us.
Even if I can add to that real quick, we also had Iranian organizations across the political spectrum advocate for this, which I think is just a great show of unity by the community. There was only one organization that calls itself Iranian American that was against this. And that's for reasons I don't really want to get into, but Armin knows what I'm talking about, so he's trying to hide his smile. But Iranians do generally, like, we don't vote as much as we should, so this was a big win for us. Of course, as this revolution has faced setbacks, including the incredibly violent and demoralizing crackdowns across the country and the limited internet access, we do have to take these things into account in discussing the way forward for Iran. So besides the risk that protesters face in the country, like here we can go and do support protests, and we're like, oh, maybe someone from the Islamic Republic here like watching us, but we're not, that scared. But there you truly are risking your life, even if you're not killed. A lot of people have been maimed or lost eyes participating in protests. It really is very dangerous. Beyond that, because the Islamic Republic has been incredibly effective at not allowing dissents to grow strong, there is no clear transition government present. Armin, do you want me to hand this back to you to talk about
Sure.
the other concerns on foreign policy?
Yeah. So one thing that we have heard from, we've met with Department of State officials, we've met with legislators, and one thing we hear is that there's an incredible fear about what's to come. Last time there was a revolution in Iran, we see the outcome, we're living the outcome. So what's going to happen this time when there's no clear transition government? What is this revolution going to lead to, right? So there's a lot of concern about the West about, all right, well, what's next? What's going to happen when we, go into Iraq and bring in a new government? What's going to happen when we go into Afghanistan? What's going to be the outcome there? So how do we add something else to the mix, even more instability? What's going to come after this? We would love for it to be a democracy in the Middle East that's going to be an ally, that's not going to be a nuclear threat. But how do we prove that that's actually going to happen? And that has caused a lot of Western nations to be a little bit more hesitant. And they've also seen the Iranian people fight back in 2002, 2008, 2017. So they're wondering if this is different. And I would argue, and I think we would argue that this is different. This is the greatest movement against the regime. We have seen a cross industry, cross sector, cross strata collection of Iranians coming together, calling not just for reform, but for regime for the first time. Other struggles that we have are some groups are trying to act in the name of all Iranians. One of them happens to be the MEK, and I've had family that were MEK back in the day, and they are claiming to represent the Iranian people, but this is a group that has a very strong but small group of support. They're primarily based in Albania now because they were effectively put in exile as well. But they were a terrorist group until 2012. And I'll tell you that when I went to visit some congressional offices in Washington, D.C., they actually had members that were following me and filming me. And it was a really interesting experience. I didn't know they had that kind of presence in Washington, D.C., but they were there. And I heard that they fund a few members to sit there and observe all the action. And MEK has close ties to a couple of members of Congress, including none other than Sheila Jackson Lee from Houston. She's their greatest advocate. And it's really interesting to me that Sheila Jackson Lee of Houston is the greatest supporter of MEK and has been for a while. I don't know why that is. It doesn't make sense to me. MEK might have some presence in Houston because we do have a large Iranian American community in Houston, but there are Iranian American communities across the country, and Sheila Jackson Lee happens to be their strongest supporter. There's also some strong support and opposition for the former prince, the son of the Shah that we mentioned earlier. There's some people that think he is our crown prince, and some people that say, no way, a monarchy in 2023. What are we thinking? So that has caused some issues as well, and it's creating issues about how we can align as one movement and what future we actually envision for ourselves. And it's also a culture of mistrust. The regime has done a great job of pinning us against each other. And most recently, in the last week, we've actually heard that some of the experts that the United States has been working with are allegedly working on behalf of the regime. And that has always been thrown around as a theory. Accusations have been thrown around about a couple of these folks, but now there's documentation and there's articles being written to kind of prove the case. So there's so much mistrust in our community. We are so quick, because of the history in Iran, to point to each other and question our allegiances and our purposes, and it makes it a little bit tougher. And I know I'm getting a little bit negative, but I promise you, the Iranian people, this is a part of the growing pains of working toward democracy. This is a part of learning how even dreaming about having a democracy and a chance to decide what the next step will be for the first time in decades. This is a part of that struggle, but they are struggles. I think we can go to the next one.
And being, realistic is different from being pessimistic, of course. And I think there's a lot of hope to be found and celebrated through the involvement of the diaspora and the growth of organizations like PFIT, which didn't really exist even a year ago, I think, right? There have been efforts, and there are experts who have congregated, and they're working on filling that gap of making that answer of, well, what's next? They are working on transition plans, including for Iran's economic transition, for Iran's democratic transition. And two such groups are Iran Democracy Council, which I think is headquartered in, most of its members are based in the DC area. And then Iran Essence is a collaborative group that will work with other groups. It's Silicon Valley based. It has a more technocratic approach, but its goal is to chart out the first 100 days of a transition in order to prevent the kind of civil disruptions that security experts are concerned about. And there are also, we didn't mention them, but there are also other groups that are, working on a transition to a monarchy. But the overall point is that there is a variety of really educated people, experts who are thinking about these questions and coming up with plans and making the investments to make sure that Iran doesn't descend into chaos should the regime collapse and leave.
Yeah, and we're about to close out by I think we have one more slide after this, but how can you help? Why do we take up 40 minutes of your day? There's a lot going on in the world that you can help out with. There's a lot that Amnesty International addresses. And how do you prioritize? Sometimes it feels overwhelming that, there's about 20 movements across the globe for democracy, for human rights, for gender rights. How do you pick and choose who you support, who you spend your time on? So I always tell people, just pick one or two and really spread the word, in addition to whatever's close to home for you. So for me, it is Ukraine and Afghanistan, and there's two specific reasons for that, since I want to model the behavior. For Ukraine, I'm incredibly embarrassed that the Iranian regime is helping arm and assist the killing of Ukrainian citizens. And it's very important to me that Ukrainians know that Iranians and those of us who do want democracy do not want that. We want this revolution to succeed so that our government is no longer funding the killing of innocent lives across the globe. And when it comes to the Afghani people, historically speaking, not only are they the neighbor of Iran, but a lot of them migrate to Iran, and sometimes they're treated as second-class citizens in Iran when they are amazing human beings, some of my favorite people, one of my favorite cultures across the globe. And right now they are fighting for women's rights in Iran, and the fight against gender apartheid is especially present in Iran and Afghanistan. And if we don't see changes, the literacy rates, the quality of life, women's rights in that region are going to diminish even further than they are today, which is hard to even imagine. So my hope is that we can ask for whoever of y'all choose to prioritize the Iranian movement for democracy, that you help spread the word beyond Iranian Americans. Sometimes the Parvins, the Niloufars, and the Armins of the world, we send messages to each other and we know about the movement really well, but we just keep sending and liking those posts to each other. We need some folks outside of our community to help spread the message and help other people know about the issues that affect us. And maybe we can do the same vice versa. So that's how we move this from a small Iranian community issue to being a humanitarian issue that we all care about. So that's why this is so important to us.
And if any of y'all were interested, we're not telling you to go sign it because we're a C3, but if y'all are interested, there is a website for the campaign to end gender apartheid. It singles out Iran and Afghanistan because in those countries, the way that women are systematically persecuted and excluded from public life goes beyond, discrimination that women generally face around the world. And a lot of legal scholars have been developing this concept of gender apartheid to make it a crime against humanity as well. So the website is genderpartheid.today if you're interested in learning more. If you're interested in learning more about us, we're glad to send information to Brother Muhammad to circulate after, but our website's pfidusa.org. We do have an Instagram that our comms team works very hard on updating to keep people abreast of news and developments. And we do have an email if you'd like to reach out to us. We'll be very glad to hear from you. So thank you so much for spending your Monday evening with us, and we're happy to take questions.
Thank you, Niloufar, and thank you, Armin. So folks who have some questions, you can unmute yourself, ask the question, and let them answer it. We have 7 minutes before we close the meeting, so keep them brief. Go ahead.
Can I ask a question? Oh, I'm sorry. Would you suggest we contact our Senate on behalf of the Massa Act as it's passed the House?
Yes, that would be amazing. Yeah, the more senators we can get on board, the better. It was such an effort to get all those House members aligned, and I imagine it's going to be the same fight through the Senate. So please, 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 if anybody's interested, definitely reach out to us and we can send you some of the documents that we're using to advocate. Niloufar and some other members of our group are also going to Washington, D.C. soon to advocate on behalf of the Massa Act, among other issues.
Could I give you my email, or could Muhammad give you my email? Because I'm definitely interested in maybe organizing a call-in action or something.
Oh, that'd be amazing. Sure.
Yeah,
If you
Julie,
chat,
I have their email addresses. I will share it with you.
Cool, thank you.
And this whole meeting is recorded, and we will post it on our website too.
Armin, how do we do?
Great, thank you.
Good job. Okay, so Niloufar, you wanted to stop sharing so folks can see each other and then ask you questions?
I think I did stop sharing. Did I?
Yes.
Yes, it's no longer sharing.
Oh,
You still see it?
no, I don't. Hold on a second. Anyway, go ahead. Whoever wants to have the question, because for some reason I can't see
I think Mr. Tomlinson has his hand up.
Yeah, I just have one question. One of the things we heard about when in the 1978-79 uprising was about the lavish lifestyle of the Shah. What about the current leadership? Do they have a lavish lifestyle as well?
Not as openly. They try to seem humble externally, but internally they live very nice lives, and their children travel the world and go to the colleges of their choice in the US, in Canada, elsewhere abroad. But externally, they're not living in lavish palaces. They have a more humble, I guess, visual or what they represent.
Okay.
So they won't have US celebrities at their palace or skiing on the lake with them, unlike the Shah in his later years.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions for Armin or Niloufar?
I have a comment I'd like to make. For one thing, I'm old enough to remember when Iran was a very sophisticated country and women dressed very well. That was long ago. I went to Egypt when Tahrir Square was still burning, and I know it's not the same country at all, but I wanted to tell you an experience I had. There was a woman reporter who came in and talked to us, and she was so excited. She and her daughter were going to vote for the first time in their lives. And then we came home and everything fell apart there. She didn't get to vote. She didn't have a job anymore. And that was so personal for me. I think about her all the time, wonder whatever happened to her. And so the whole East, really, when we start getting into that same sort of, you will dress this way and you will act this way, I just have such a intense feeling toward them. And what's the best thing I can do?
Well, two things.
Okay.
I want to respond to three things, actually. First, keep spreading that story because I think that's really powerful. And it's also a message to keep going, because I think right now, this is our most powerful moment of getting a new democratic government elected. And one of my greatest concerns is that if this moment passes, there are a lot of people whose hopes are going to be diminished in a very powerful way. And it's also going to mean that a lot of Iranians will never live to see the day when we have a democracy. And that's absolutely terrifying, including people in my own family. I want them to live to see the day when we have democracy in our home country. Part two is that it's an Iranian pastime to think back to those days that you were describing. Like, that's what we think about. The greatest thing for the Shah's legacy has been the regime, right? Ever since he came out, think about how Democrats thought about George Bush, 15 years ago compared to now. Now we're like, George Bush is wonderful, amazing Republican.
Yes.
He represented values. We had a very different idea back then. And I think regardless of where y'all are in the political spectrum, you can understand the Democratic viewpoint on that. But yeah, we always talk about what it was like. Of course, I wasn't there, but I hear the stories and I hear the experiences, and it makes it that much more painful to think that we're going backwards in history.
All right, thank you, guys. Hey, Bob, do you want to do your raffle now?
Okay, I'll do it.
All right.